So I selected initially shadows and symbols, and so I'm going to take the lead. But then, actually, Megan, I thought you suggested we expanded into episodes 2 and 3, which are after image. And then Murphy took it the other direction and picked up episode 1. So we're going to tie these three together. But the reason I selected 2 and then picked up on 3 was I was a huge Ezri Dax fan. And the reason I liked her so much was because I found the thought of how do you respond when you literally go to bed and wake up with 8 voices in your head. Now, I'm not going to presuppose to talk about you guys, but I will tell you, I got lots of voices in my head and they don't stop, but they've been like that all my life. So I'm okay with that. They're generally centered on me though. They're not centered on 300 years of Trill history. And I just can't imagine what that would be like. I mean, there's several, I guess you would call them humor scenes. She orders a Rectagino at one point and then realizes that's not really something she likes. Curzon like that. And it's funny in the first few scenes, played with great humor. But I really found it to be a very interesting way to think about how do you deal with all the voices in your head. And that's something I've dealt with for a long time. So I really resonated with that. Then but in Symbols and Shadows, it was three storylines going on at once. And they were three brilliant and beautiful storylines. So it really gave me the opportunity to not just focus on Ezri, her reality, her becoming Ezri Dax, and then the crew of DS9 learning to live with a new Dax. But specifically in episode 2, Symbols and Shadows, the 3 components, we got to see, I thought, a brilliant end to Benny Russell. And this was the scene I remembered the most from the first time I saw it, which is he's in the padded room and he's got a pencil and he's literally written the entire story of Captain Benjamin Sisko on the padded walls. And the doctor is trying to convince him he needs to stop and that he needs to cover it with white paint.
Yeah.
And so even more symbolism between black and white. But I've been thinking about mental health. So the mental health issues of that really have always resonated with me is what if we're living in his story? What if this podcast is a part of the Benny Russell story? We just happen to be a part of his story, not our story or not another story. And I recognize we could spend a lot of time on that. And I do spend a lot of time thinking about that. And that storyline goes back all the way to the immunity syndrome and TOS. So it's a great trope of science fiction. But then the second storyline, or third, if you count Ezri as the first, is the honoring of Jadzia Dax through trying to get her into Stov-Vo-Kor. And she can't get into Stov-Vo-Kor the traditional way, which is to kill an enemy and eat its heart. She has killed an enemy, but at least on camera, she's not eating its heart. Channeling, no doubt, their inner Aztecs, she has to be a part of a great victory or be honored with a great Klingon victory. And so Worf, along with Galrak, Quark O'Brien, and the Dr. Bashir go off to blow up a shipyard, our Cardassian shipyard. And that segment, too, I found incredibly interesting as well. Obviously, Worf was the focal point because he's the one that wants to get Jadzia into Stov-Vo-Kor. But we see the friendship between Bashir and O'Brien and Worf, and Quark is there. It's not clear if he's there for Jadzia. It's not clear that he's there for Worf, but he's there. And in a way that I've really not seen him stick his neck out before, to the point where he even invokes Moogie to help get him through a difficult time. The other interesting character that I saw a lot of, if not growth from, difference was Galron, because he supported O'Brien, Bashir, and Quark being there, or the Ferengi as they call him. Um, that's not the Gowron we saw two seasons ago. And he was the one that was a voice of reason for Worf. And of course, Worf comes around, and the blowing up of the shipyard facility is a spectacular CGI. So that was cool. But the Benny Russell scene, that's the one that resonated with me. That I just found it incredibly powerful. And of course, Ezri is on her journey as well. It starts with a scene in Captain Sisko's father's restaurant in New Orleans. And Murphy, I'm going to maybe turn to you next to explain what they're doing in New Orleans in a time of great conflict with the Cardassians. But it was so central to this, not only this episode, but the storyline and the journey they take together. So maybe I could pitch it over to you and you can walk us through that part of this episode, leading on the opening episode.
It's 3 months later, obviously, because there was always that summer gap. So Ben and Jake are back in New Orleans. They're with his father. They're at the restaurant. He loses it after Jadzia dies, obviously, and he has to go somewhere. And there's that great line at the end of season 6 where Kira says, it's one of the last lines of the season. She says, "I was afraid of that. He took his baseball. It means he doesn't know if he's coming back." I mean, that's incredibly symbolic. And the baseball, again, that physical baseball that he brings with him, that blowing off the piano in that one scene, that's the sort of catalyst for his visions, which is kind of plays through the whole thing. He throws the baseball on Tyree and he carries it with him and he frotters with it in his hand. And that's his sort of connection when he's looking for answers. You also mentioned the scene with, I just wanted to bring this up briefly. It's something I noticed for the first time in that episode, in that two-parter. Sorry, that's my mistake. Something in that two-parter, when you see Sisko in the kitchen, he's wearing these white kitchen outfit, white apron, white kitchen smocks. Then it's reminiscent of him in that white room, wearing that bathrobe and white outfit. It's also symbolic of the white walls that he's writing his story on. And if you think back to the very first time he encountered the prophets, and even at the end of this scene, he fades into this white haze of white. And I wrote something down about this, or just remembering here. It's very interesting, right? This is like representing, at least it seemed to me, the sort of confusion that he feels about himself. This sort of white light is what he fades back to into uncertainty with the prophets, or when he meets his mother, or when he has these answers. It's that almost nothingness that he experiences things through when he has visions, or when he's uncertain of whether or not he's Benny Russell or Sisko. I just thought it was an interesting touch, and you can see that he drops that row of white paint on the floor, and the camera focuses really heavily on that. And then you zoom in on the writing on the wall, and then I like that. I'm not sure if that's intentional, but it seemed very symbolic. Yeah, no, it was interesting, but yeah, it's neat to see the dynamic in that first one before Ezri arrives and he's searching out who Sarah Sisko was, and the fact that his father is so like almost hostile about any questions, which makes sense, but yeah.
Murphy, what did you think about his trip to planet Tyree? And was that consistent with what you've seen of him searching?
Yeah, I did.
His use of the baseball.
I looked it up. I thought that it had something to do with Tyree and
it turns out it may not have
his Kirk's buddy, but apparently it doesn't. It's just, I think it's named after someone on staff or something like that. So it is a coincidence, but it could be that the planet was named for this guy.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It's strange. You talked about, how is Sisko, one of those decorated officers and at the forefront of everything, how is he just allowed to go on sabbatical? Jadzia's death is regrettable, yes, but they're in the middle of a war. He can't just up and leave. I mean, maybe by virtue of his position, he's allowed to do that, take a temporary leave of absence, but it seems odd. I don't know about him going to Tyree before. There's nothing mentioned about it. He seems to have spent a lot of time floating in space. and not so much time on the ground. But yeah, it's curious. I'm not sure. I do that he progressively gets a little crazier as soon as he lands. And those weird Starfleet issue desert capes are pretty cool. I like those too. It's kind of neat. What's that? The weird, yeah. It's an odd Starfleet
I
uniform
like them
choice.
too. I thought, yeah, I like
So
the
Megan-
whole.
Megan, what are some of your initial thoughts?
Yeah, more about these were like really symbolism heavy episodes. And I also, of course, watched the last season of season 6 so I could weep over Jadzia Dax's death again and Worf's mourning of her. But something I thought was, this caught me up a little bit. And I love your response. This is just a minor thing, not a huge plot point. But how likely is it in the age of DS9 for maternity to go unnoticed for someone's entire life up until that point? Like, how likely is it that never came up on a scan?
It's really neat. Because nobody
Because Mom wasn't
and
his
his father and his stepmother, I mean, they talk about it. It's his father to depth or just decide never to tell him. He's so young when Sarah leaves. I think he's a 1.5 when she books off. And presumably they just decide that lying to him would be great.
Yeah.
Which does.
I thought it was really fun how we had the kind of there were two myth systems happening at the same time in these episodes. So with the Worf and the Stov-Vo-Kor arc, we've got your Viking mythology and afterlife symbolism going on, and then with Sisko, you've got a very Christian one where he is determined to be not just the emissary of the prophets, but kind of is descended literally from the prophets. So he was like descended from the wormhole aliens / the deities, and then going through the quest through the desert. And having to do this trial. And I thought it was really interesting looking at maybe both of them, the experience of Benny Russell and the experience of Sisko were both the tests. And maybe he had to achieve both of them in order to actually open the orb. And
Here's what I'm thinking the whole series.
And expel the power wraith.
I mean, this is what blows my mind is that if
I think
Sarah goes back in time and is inhabited by or if the prophet goes back in time and inhabits Sarah to make sure that Sisko is born, does that mean in order to expel the power wraith from the Celestial Temple? Does that mean that Sisko inadvertently sets up his own birth by going into the wormhole? If he does not become the prophet, there is no resurgence of the power wraiths because this whole thing with Dukat, there's no need to create the Sisko because there's no power wraith in the wormhole. The only reason to put the emissary out there is to get Sisko to open it to free the wormhole. This sounds very circular, but it's like Sisko setting up his own time loop. It's a little nuts. Yeah.
It's completely circular. Well, let me ask you both this question related to the last episode of season 6, since you both rewatched it. Why did Dukat say to Jadzia after he had killed her, I'm sorry, I didn't mean, it wasn't meant to be you? I've always wondered that question.
Yeah.
I think
that's a very good answer.
Assumed, this is my thing. I thought he thought it would.
He also,
okay.
He also would never have killed Kira.
Yeah.
Because Kira is a focal point for his psyche in a weird way. I think he probably does. I think he does think that assume he's in the temple. He probably assumes it would have been Kira. But I think it also has to do with the fact that he has absolutely zero relationship with Jadzia. She means very little to him. So he has no compunction about killing her because they don't interact in the series whatsoever, which is really weird. If you look back throughout pretty much all of DS9, I think there's like a few characters that have almost zero interaction with Dukat. One of them being O'Brien, never touched him, or very little, and the other one being Jadzia. Even Bashir ends up talking with Dukat more often. Yeah, it's quite strange. But I think that he thought she was like a non-entity.
There was one other storyline that was going on in Shadows and Symbols, which was the Romulans having an office on DS9 and putting troops or something on Derna. I guess where I was either confused or had questions is if Durna's within Bajoran territory, why wasn't Bajor making the decision on what to do? And why was Starfleet telling Bajor in the form of Major, I guess, Colonel now, Kira, that she had to stand down? Is that just the Federation taking over in wartime?
Well, that's I think the kind of the weird interplay around DS9, right? So it's the moon was under Bajoran control. The Romulan senator asked Kira, who is in control of DS9, which is a Federation outpost, but also has the direct line to the Bajoran ministers. Kira got the permission from the ministers for the hospital because I think it was a military installation and therefore related to DS9, but still getting permission from
Yeah.
the Bajorans. That was my take. But it's a little bit of a confusing situation. And I was so mad. I
she's
was
great.
ready to like that, like Surak, the Romulan senator. I was so ready to like her. I would.
This season,
in the series.
She's a Romulan.
And I was wondering though, was it all a Dominion setup? Because I know Wayoon, buddy, his name I can't remember. We're chatting about how it was the Romulans were so predictably treacherous, and
And I
having
think
that
it's
instability on DS9 was really
the
handy
fact
for
that
them.
Romulans are
The setup
really
from them
shifty.
all along.
They
Yeah,
always
kind of
have
thought
been.
that was-
This is and when Yoon says this, it's exactly the kind of thing that the Romulans would do. Bajor gives them this moon for the hospital, and of course they're going to stockpile weapons on it because once the Romulans have planted their flag somewhere, they never get back territory. So the Bajors. So the thing is, I mean, this is the thing. But it's in orbit of Bajor. It's not like a planet in the Bajoran system. It's legit around Bajor, and that's a significant security threat. I'm very surprised that the Federation would just be like, yo, you can't build a missile platform around our base under the guise of a hospital. I can't believe that Ross would go along with that.
But they're so critical to the alliance, is the thing. The Romulan
Yeah.
fleet is really necessary in the war against the Dominion. So I can understand why
Yeah.
they were hesitant about it. They're not nice fellows, but they're bedfellows.
It's a weird request. I mean, the front line is far enough away from Bajor that if you're backtracking with wounded to Bajor, there's a lot of empty space on DS9 they could set up facilities on. They don't need a whole moon to build a hospital. It's very weird. Yeah, if I'm straight.
That's true.
But it's cute seeing Bajor's little collection of little ships all ready to defend Bajor against a fleet of 14 warbirds, which is massive overkill, by the way, and takes significant material away from the war effort. You don't need 14 warbirds to deliver band-aids. It's insane.
I guess I wanted to end maybe with a question of, does this episode work standalone? Does it work as a part of almost a three episode trilogy, or is something else going on? So Megan, you want to start?
Yeah, I think it's at least kind of deeply integrated with Image in the Sand. So the first one of the season. I think those two are kind of a dyad. And then I mean, judging by Netflix's presentation of now the continuation from the end of season 6, I think they were all kind of intended to be seen together kind of as a bridge. Shadows and Symbols probably could stand alone with some like light modifications. But I think the two first episodes of the season are definitely one episode in terms of like the arcs that are happening, which I put under the grand heading of this: Worf blows up a sun for love. That is what I'm calling this episode. Shadows and Symbols is not the real name. It is Worf blows up a sun for love.
Yeah, I think it's
I think it's all
I think
together.
it's good. I like the film. I'm glad it was chosen. I like Ezri. I mean, I'll admit it. I like Ezri. I mean, I was a Jadzia fan, but I thought Ezri did a nice job in the 7th season. She's stepping into a well-established group and at the very end of a story, so it makes a nice little hitch. I mean, see who she is.
Like Jadzia,
The actress that made Nicole DeBoer, she's a Canadian actress, and she was in a sci-fi show when I was young called, I think it was Deepwater Blank or something like that. It was like a bunch of teens on a spaceship, and I watched that as a kid, and I thought it was pretty good. So seeing Ezri there made me happy. But yeah, no, it's fun. I mean, it is connected to the 3rd episode. I mean, I mean, that third episode is Ezri finding their footing and Garrett figuring out who he is, and it's very interesting stuff. I like it a lot. I don't know, then it ties up the Benny Russell stuff pretty well, but still leaves us kind of wondering who Benny Russell is.
For me, it worked on a standalone because of the incorporation of the other storylines.
Mhm.
Obviously, you now know
Yeah.
my love of that Benny Russell scene. That's my
have to
favorite
agree
Benny
with you.
Russell scene of all the Benny Russell scenes, including the original episode. But the more I watch the Worf, Jadzia, Stov-Vo-Kor scene, I can't say I couldn't draw a straight line back to TOS, but I could certainly draw a straight line back to TNG. And our exploration of Klingon culture, it was one more part of that. And so I really appreciated that. And I appreciated Galron, but I appreciated O'Brien, Bashir, and Quark because obviously not Klingons and being a part of the honoring of Jadzia and of Worf. I really enjoyed that scene for going back to some of the things we learned in TNG.
Yeah.
The Kira scene,
Yeah.
that could have been in season 1. Just that badass Kira. No, you're not taking my toys, period. You're not coming to my yard.
Yeah.
But canoodling with Odo.
Yeah. First season Kira would have been really gloved here. She wouldn't
with
have been that
Odo,
cool
well
cat at
put.
all. There would have been a
Uh-huh.
little more yelling.
Yes. I enjoyed it because of it was obviously several storylines wrapped into the one. But then when you wrapped it into the first 3, it made a lot of sense as well. And the more I thought about it, the introduction of Ezri in New Orleans, I thought added a little bit different dynamic because Sisko was still lost. And you put a lost person with a either more or less lost person, but he had to be a commander to Ezri and try to give her structure and guidance as her superior officer. It gave him a way to maybe come back to being Captain Sisko as well. Within the arc, I thought it fit perfectly. And because of the various storylines that were going throughout, I thought it worked. All right, let's see what is up next time.